Joining us now, Pennsylvania Senator, ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, our great friend, Senator Pat Toomey. Mr. Toomey, welcome back, sir.
Thanks, Larry.
I would think, Senator, with the CPI and the CBO accurate scoring, I mean, after all, Biden wants a transformational change. To me, that means permanent entitlements and whatnot. And today's PPI, Pat Toomey, I would just think this buries the bill. How can people vote for this with these late numbers?
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think this has been, this data, these numbers, the inflation number, the massive size of this, really, it should be the Bernie budget buster bill is what it really is. This is the vindication of Joe Manchin, right? He said he was worried about too much inflation. Well, it turns out it's much worse than even he thought, and accelerating. And by the way, this bill, if it passes, will clearly make it still worse. So the only sensible thing to do is kill this bill now. We've got to do all we can to try to kill it before it does even more damage.
What's your thinking, you know, with these big inflation numbers and the CBO numbers? I mean, look, the White House is calling the CBO numbers fake news or fake something or other. Biden used to call the CBO the gold standard of economic models. And I think they did everybody a service by running these things out permanently over 10 years and longer. Are other senators, okay, I mean, there are more moderates. There's Manchin, there's Sinema, there's Tester, there's Hassan, there's the lady from Las Vegas, Nevada. I mean, I'm hearing through the grapevine that they are also moving away from the bill, even though they don't have the leadership visibility that Joe Manchin has.
Well, look, I am distinctly under the impression that there are a lot of Democrats who are uncomfortable with various aspects of this. But the question is, which one is actually willing to cast a vote no? Which one is willing to say, no, I will stop that if you proceed? And so far, the only ones we've heard that from are Senators Manchin and Sinema. So I just don't know the extent of the resolve of anybody else who has reservations at this point. Look, I think at a minimum, Senator Manchin ought to say, hey, I'm not voting for anything for at least several months to see if this inflation all dissipates. Now, by then, maybe there'll be a few more Democrats who realize what a disaster this is.
Do we know any scuttlebutt? That's a little unfair, Senator Toomey, but do we have any scuttlebutt about this Manchin-Biden phone call?
I couldn't get anything out of Joe when I chatted with him earlier today, so I don't know.
All right. Well, it's good that you're chatting with him. That's very important. Let me ask you about timetable stuff to get between now and the end of the year. I was on the phone with your super staffer, John Cruz, who once worked for Kudlow at the National Economic Council.
Right.
And
when you stole him from me.
I did. I stole him from you. Actually, I stole a couple from you.
I know you did.
But I returned them. See what a good guy I am? I gave them back to you.
That helps, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're forgiven. But
I'm trying to climb out of Dante's Inferno on that. But John Cruz mentioned the bird bath, okay, the bird rule. Parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough, who herself, unfortunately, has been sick for a while. I hope she's recovering nicely. But the bird bath is going to take a while, isn't it, to figure out what works and what's allowed and what's not allowed?
Well, exactly right. And as you know, Larry, this is a test that legislation that is going through the reconciliation process, which is the process the Democrats are using because no Republican will support this madness. It has constraints, and the constraints are that every provision has to have a significant budget, in fact, principally be a budgetary provision. So if you have policy changes that you want to impose, they're not supposed to ride along on this package. And so we have begun the process of litigating some of the policies that we think are obviously not budgetary in their nature. But it has not been completed yet. In fact, in some cases, the Democrats haven't given us final language yet, so it's not even possible to fully adjudicate this. But we have started the process, and it is not finished.
One of the big ones, as I understand it, which made it into the House bill or was out, but then they put it in, is the issue of illegal immigration. Now, you're an immigration reformer, I'm an immigration reformer, but budget bills like this are not the right spot, I would think. It's not going to pass the Byrd test, but that stuff is in the House bill.
That is correct, and we think that it's inconceivable that that can survive the Byrd-Bath test, as it were, because it is a policy issue and it's driven, budgetary impact are ancillary. It's really an attempt to change policy. And you're right, it should not be done in this fashion.
Are there election reform things in this bill that came over from the House?
Larry, I wish you wouldn't give them ideas. Okay,
okay,
I don't think so. I don't think there are election reform provisions in it. If there were, I don't think that would survive the Byrd test. But really, please, it's bad enough.
Yes, yes, indeed, sir. So it's going to take a while. That's my point. You know, I'm firmly in the Manchin camp. Pause the bill. The more it gets put off, I think the less probably it'll ever get done next year. So I think this Byrd-Bath from the parliamentarian is going to be important. Just a quickie, the NDAA, National Defense Authorization, will that get through?
Yeah, that'll pass. I think that passes tomorrow at some point. I think it's when the final passage vote will occur, and that'll pass easily. And
I heard also, Senator, a deal has been struck to plug in on the debt extension, the debt ceiling extension, $2.5 trillion, which puts it into 2023. $2.5 trillion. I guess that'll get you 2 years, although I'm not sure if Biden has his way. But I just want to ask you, with all respect to Mitch McConnell, who was a great friend and, in my opinion, a great leader, but, you know, by doing this deal, I mean, you know this, there's $400 billion of spending sequesters, spending cuts that would have gone through had this deal not been done. And slow, we know, be nice to cut some spending every now and then because the caps were violated.
Yeah, the Democrats were going to pass this one way or another, right? They could use, my view all along had been if we refuse to cooperate, which we should refuse to cooperate because they're the ones that are driving this massive number. Think about it, $2.5 trillion of additional debt on top of the $28 trillion we already have. And so much of that is because of the wildly excessive spending they plan on inflicting on us. So my view all along had been force them to use the reconciliation tool that's available to them, pass it themselves, and make sure that they admit to the American people the kind of damage they're doing.
Last one. Of course, one of our favorite subjects, you and mine, was this Madame Omarova from Moscow State University, who was, from your good offices and the others, forced to withdraw her nomination as banking czar, controller of the currency. Now, there's a flap going on. You know, the regulatory assault by Team Biden never stops. And I just want to ask you about this Rohit Chopra, who's in the Consumer Finance Protection. He's a board member of the FDIC, which is a very important agency and an independent agency and one with a lot of credibility. But as I understand it, Mr. Chopra and his other allies from Team Biden are trying to take over all the regulatory stuff, including ride roughshod over the FDIC chair, Jelena McWilliams. Now, I guess we survived that today, but is that a harbinger? They want to regulate everything. It's the progressive left regulation. Steve Forbes calls it modern socialism. What's doing with this FDIC business? Yeah, so it's very, very disturbing because you're right. They are not satisfied with the ordinary tools at their disposal. And let's face it, they're all over the administration, the regulatory bodies, the independent agencies. But as it happens, by virtue of statute, there is a Republican appointee who remains the chair of the FDIC. And the chair of that body, as with most bodies, gets to set the agenda for their organization. And so as an ex officio member, the head of the CFPB, Mr. Chopra decides that that's not good enough. He wants to simply effectively depose the chair, effectively be able to overrule and supersede the chair. They don't have the authority to do this. It's outrageous, and it's a huge power grab, and if they could do it there, where does this end?
you know, they intend to have a whole lot of new nominees confirmed to the Fed. Maybe they can just, you know, overrule the chairman of the Fed too. This is how radical it has gotten, Larry, that not only do they have these radical policy views, but they intend to just overturn the norms of how these agencies have operated so that they can impose their agenda.
I mean, it just seems to me, we have to close this down, but it seems to me, Senator, the left progressive woke business, they want to flood the zone in all the regulatory appointments. And I raise this point. Steve Forbes calls it modern socialism. You don't take over the factories or the means of production like the communists did in the 1920s and 30s. Instead, you use regulations to take over sector by sector, whether it's energy or healthcare or, in this case, banking. And this is their agenda. I mean, they're picking far out left-wing people who hate the industry, hate the industries they're being asked to regulate.
Yeah, and some of them, as in the case of Omarova, at least we had some clarity. She had provided us a lot of help in terms of writings and speeches and presentations she made where she forcefully advocated for nationalizing the banking industry and having the Fed set wages and prices throughout the economy and all kinds of other terrible policy. But, you know, some of them are a little bit more devious, and they keep their intentions a little bit less publicized until they're in a position to actually implement it. It's very disturbing.
Last one on this regulatory takeover from the left. So, okay, Jay Powell's been renominated. I'm sure he'll get through the Senate, no problem. But I just want to ask you, I mean, you're on banking now. Lael Brainerd, longtime board member, under questioning many times, has never acknowledged that she's a believer in capitalism.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
I mean, she's been asked socialism or capitalism, and she won't give a straight answer. And she's going to be nominated as vice chair. She's going to have to come before your committee, and she's going to have a vote on the floor. You think she can make it or not?
I don't know, but I saw the exchange, and it was a very simple, straightforward question. Are you a capitalist or a socialist?
Right.
And she couldn't answer the question.
Right.
Larry, that's not a complicated question. And someone who's going to serve in a senior position on the Fed Open Market Committee, on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, my goodness, you shouldn't have to think twice about that. So I'll have a lot of questions for Governor Brainerd when when we get to that part of the process.
Senator Pat Toomey, are you a capitalist or a socialist?
Yeah, I'm a capitalist, Larry.
I know you are. God bless. Happy holidays if we don't see you.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Terrific stuff.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up.